day and welcome to our November 2025 sustainability webinar. Now, after talking about and discussing AASB 2 throughout 2025, we're now coming to the stage where we bring it all together. And this is where we prepare your first mandatory sustainability report. So welcome to the session. My name's Aletta Boshoff, and I'm the National Leader for Sustainability Reporting, as well as IFRS and Corporate Reporting at BDO Australia. Now, BDO acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community, and we pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We are nearing the end of our sustainability webinars for 2025. In December, we are looking at a session where we discuss how can you ensure that your mandatory sustainability report is assurance ready. We also have monthly IFRS and corporate reporting webinars. Last week, we actually discussed financial and sustainability reporting, and we provided an update to help businesses to get ready for the 31 December 2025 reporting season. Our final IFRS and corporate reporting webinar for 2025 is on the tricks and traps of fair value measurement. I would also like to remind you of a new initiative. BDO Australia has partnered with Quitch, and Quitch is a mobile-first platform where you can enjoy our videos on sustainability essentials for financial leaders or professionals. If you log into Quitch on your mobile phone, you download the app, you can buy these videos. They are short 10 to 15 minute videos. You answer questions at the end of the video and you get CPD certificates. So you can watch these videos on your phone, on the train, as you commute, and it just makes it much easier to learn more about sustainability. I would also like to invite you to our final Carbon Accounting Masterclass for 2025, and that will be presented virtually on Wednesday, the 3rd of December. We've also released our dates for 2026, and you can register now for those Carbon Accounting Masterclasses. Would also like to remind you that BDO has prepared a AASB S2 climate-related disclosures checklist, and you can download it from this slide. Again, on this slide, a bit of an overview. There are 4 pillars of disclosures across governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. And then there's actually a 5th pillar, and that's the general requirements from AASB 1 that's carried forward to the appendix to AASB 2, which makes it mandatory. And it's in order to get AASB 2 to work nicely with the accompanying financial report. 150 disclosure requirements. Then I would like to start this session, as I always do, by referring to the latest developments. Now, we know that the International Sustainability Standards Board have proposed some amendments to IFRS S2, and that is in response to feedback that they've received from preparers. The AASB have met last week, and they've made the tentative decision to also amend AASB S2 to match the ISSB's tentative decision to issue amendments to IFRS S2 in December 2025. Now, they have tentatively set the effective date for the amendments of annual reporting periods beginning on or after 1 January 2027, which is aligned with the effective date for the amendments to IFRS S2, but they have permitted early adoption. And this is really important for us in Australia. So if you are a Group 1 entity preparing your first mandatory sustainability report for 31 December 2025, you've got the option to early adopt these amendments. Now, if an entity wishes to apply the amendments, they must take the decision to early adopt the amendments in writing by the directors. And if you want further information on that, you can look at section 336, capital A, number 3 of the Corporations Act. Now, the 4 proposed amendments are explained in our article, and I've provided a link. And the amending standard to AASB S2 is anticipated, pending the final wording from the ISSB, to be formally made and published on the AASB website by the end of 2025. And that is very important. So our first cohort of reporters under mandatory sustainability reporting have the proposed amendments available for early adoption. So we are hopeful that this amending standard will be available for early adoption before 31 December 2025. So that's some good news. Then if you look at those proposed amendments, as I said, we've published an article earlier in the year and the link is provided. But just a quick recap, 4 proposed amendments. The first 2 are some relief around Scope 3 Category 15 measurements. That's not a critical thing for us, and it's not time sensitive because Scope 3 is only in the second year. There's also some relief from the use of the Global Industry Classification Standard. And then the third one is actually the more important one for us in Australia, and that is a clarification on the jurisdictional relief. We know Australia has NGER as a jurisdictional requirement, so therefore this proposed amendment would be very helpful. And then also the last one is very relevant, because the proposal will give us permission to use jurisdiction-required global warming potential values that are not from the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so IR6. In Australia, our NGA factors are based on IR5. So it's important that these proposals go through so we can continue to use the NGA factors for 31 December 2025 reporting. So that was just a recap of something we've discussed earlier. Then again, latest news from America, and that is that last week a US appeals court issued an injunction pending appeal, and they are trying to halt the implementation of a new California law that would require thousands of US companies to report on climate-related financial risks. And this is happening just weeks before this law's first mandated disclosures will be published. So what's important is the second bullet point. The court did not agree to request to halt another law requiring companies to report on their greenhouse gas emissions, which is set to come into effect later in 2026. So the more immediate requirement was mandatory disclosure of climate-related financial risks. At the moment, there's a halt on that. However, greenhouse gas emissions, which will come in a bit later, is still going ahead. And this decision from the appeals court comes in response to a request by the US Chamber of Commerce, which has been actively attempting to have the court strike down the laws on constitutional grounds, arguing that the new rules would violate the First Amendment free speech rights. Now, again, if you look just below the heading on the slide, I've included a link to an article published by ESG Today where they explain the whole situation. Again, just wanted to flag that with you. Another item under latest developments is some changes to directors' duties or liabilities of directors. So a bit of a recap. If you look at directors' duties around mandatory sustainability reporting, you'll see that it's subject to existing director obligations and the existing liability framework under the Corporations Act. So if you look at directors' duties, they have to take the care and due diligence and care and diligence to consider material climate risk, and they should not be involved in misleading and deceptive conduct. There are general disclosure obligations, maintenance of documents and information that should be provided to others, and contraventions of the provisions can attract a maximum civil penalty for an individual of just over 1.5 million. So, you know, the same potential liabilities on financial reports are also placed on sustainability reports. So that's the first thing that's important. The other thing is that directors now also have to sign a director's declaration in relation to the mandatory sustainability report. They already sign a director's declaration in relation to the financial statements. In the first 3 years, they only have to sign that the entity has taken reasonable steps to ensure the contents of the sustainability report are in accordance with the Corporations Act. And after the 3 years, they actually have to sign that the entity is complying with the requirements of the Corporations Act, and the sustainability report complies with the sustainability standards, at the moment only AASB 2. So again, the director's declaration being phased in. Then another aspect that's really important is that there is some modified liability settings. And again, this is phased in over 3 years. The directors, for a period of 3 years, have protected statements or have modified liability in relation to protected statements. Those are Scope 3, greenhouse gas emissions, scenario analysis, and transition planning. And then after the 3 years, directors have no modified liability, and therefore they've got personal liability across everything in the mandatory sustainability report. Please note a few things. From day one, action can be taken against the company by ASIC in respect of everything. So these 3 protected statements only apply to the director's liability. So directors are liable for absolutely everything in the mandatory sustainability report from day one, except for these 3 protected statements. Scope 3, scenario analysis, and transition planning. So this is what we've had, and it was written into the legislation. However, at the moment, there's also a proposal that's been introduced into Parliament. And this proposal is trying to extend the limited liability provisions, those protected statement provisions, to voluntary sustainability reporting. Again, we've written an article about that, and you can read more about that. So the key thing here, what is changing? They want to introduce, or they're proposing to introduce, a new section 1707 capital D capital A, to extend that modified liability settings for entities preparing sustainability reports on a voluntary basis, even if they're not legally required to do so. So the aim is to encourage the development of reporting and auditing capabilities across industries in the early stages of the sustainability reporting regime in compliance with AASB 2 in Australia. So if an entity, for example, a Group 2 or Group 3 entity, decide to early introduce disclosures in accordance with AASB 2, the idea is that they will also be able to use the modified liability settings. Therefore, it's really important that companies, registered schemes, registrable superannuation entities, and disclosing entities that are not required to prepare a mandatory sustainability report can use the modified liability settings for voluntary sustainability reports if they early adopt. However, the voluntary sustainability report must, number 1, comply with all the requirements for a mandatory report, including climate statements and director declarations. So you have to comply with absolutely everything. And secondly, contain a signed director's declaration stating that the modified liability settings will apply. So that is an initiative that's currently with Parliament, and we'll let you know as soon as we hear whether this has been approved or not. But I just want to flag it with you. Now, before we look at our mandatory sustainability report and preparing that report, I think it's important to sit back and consider the objective and the scope of AASB 2, because everything we prepare in this report and we disclose out in the market ultimately has to line up with the objective and the scope of AASB 2. Now, the objective of AASB 2 is to require an entity to disclose information about its climate-related risks and opportunities that is useful to primary users, so investors, financiers, currently and in future, of general purpose financial reports in making decisions relating to providing resources to the entity. So the focus is on climate-related risk and opportunities for primary users to make decisions. That's the objective. And then they also articulate in AASB 2 that AASB 2 requires an entity to disclose information about climate-related risk and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's cash flows, its access to finance, or its cost of capital over the short, medium, or long term. And in the standard, they use the word can affect the entity's prospects. And whenever you see the entity's prospects, it means the entity's cash flows, its access to finance, or cost of capital. And then AASB S2 requires an entity to disclose information about climate-related risks as well as opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's prospects, and another focus, short, medium, or long term. So we don't just look over the short term, we have to look short, medium, and long term. Then climate-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect an entity's prospects can be a difficult term to get your head around. So it's important to think about this. And that is, there's two limbs to that statement. Could reasonably be expected to affect its prospects. The first one, the could reasonably be expected that I've got in green, requires an assessment of how likely it is that the company's prospects could be affected. And secondly, if you look at a company's prospects, it's an assessment of the effects of a risk or opportunity on cash flows, access to finance, or cost of capital over the short, medium, or long term. So what's important to see here, the focus is not that we're going to disclose material risks and opportunities. We're going to disclose risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect prospects, and could reasonably be expected is likely to impact the prospects. Now, a company identifies these climate-related risks or opportunities considering an external perspective, so a market perspective. If investors or financiers are looking at the business, what risks and opportunities would they expect to see? What information about those risks and opportunities would they expect to see? And then, very important, a climate-related risk or opportunity could be identified even if the company itself does not have an expectation that that risk or opportunity could reasonably be expected to affect its prospects. Because this is a market perspective. If your company is operating in an industry where investors and financiers expect to see certain risks, you need to disclose those risks And if you don't think they impact your business, why not? Provide the reasons, provide the controls that you've got in place. Because this is all about what the market would expect of your industry, of your company. And then also for all these identified risks and opportunities, the company discloses associated material information. I just want to show it again or explain again. What you end up disclosing, you start by saying, if I look at risks and opportunities, could it reasonably be expected to affect prospects? That's the first hurdle. And then the second hurdle is when you look at all the information about those risks and opportunities, which of that information would be material to the users? So there's a gateway, there's a process. First of all, could reasonably be expected to affect prospects, and secondly, would the information be material? If you look at the scope of AASB 2, it applies to risks and opportunities. And if climate-related risk and opportunities could not reasonably be expected to affect an entity's prospects, they would be outside the scope of AASB 2. So the objective and the scope work together. If you look at the objective and the scope of AASB 2 together, this is the big picture. And it's clearly illustrated in the TCFD requirements, where we look at all the transition risks and physical risks. We look at all the opportunities. All of those have an impact on the strategy and the strategic planning of the business, have an impact on how the business manage their risk. And that then flows on to a financial impact on the profit and loss, on the cash flow statement, and on the balance sheet. Therefore, we have to disclose how these risks and opportunities impact strategy, risk management, and financial statements. Another important thing to look at before we prepare our report is transitional relief. Now, in AASB 2, paragraphs C3 to C5, they discuss transition relief. Now, transition relief are designed to give companies time to put into place reporting practices and processes in the first year of application. So this is only available in the first year that the entity applies AASB 2. And it temporarily limits disclosures around scope 3. So you don't have to do scope 3 in the first year, and you don't have to do comparatives at all in the first year. So this is temporary relief. Then there's also another temporary relief that permits companies to use existing approaches to meet certain requirements. So first of all, the GHG protocol is not mandated in year one. So if your business have used another framework to measure your greenhouse gas emissions, you can continue to do that in year one. But from year 2 onwards, you are mandated to use the GHG protocol. An example of such a framework would be the ISO framework. And then the other one, or a link to that, so you can use that previous framework to calculate emissions. It's interesting, the GHG protocol and ISO have now combined forces, and they will work together to update the GHG protocol in future. So it's good that we've got some harmonization at a standard setting level. So those are transitional relief, only for the first year. Now, the next section, which is important to consider, is the proportionality mechanisms. So this is not only for the first year, this is an ongoing aspect that's available to preparers of mandatory sustainability reports. Now, proportionality mechanisms are designed to help companies that have different levels of capability and preparedness to apply AASB 2. So proportionality mechanisms address challenges related to resource constraints or specialist availability or data availability and all. And it's designed to be helpful for companies that would find some requirements in AASB S2 challenging to apply. So this doesn't apply. Proportionality mechanisms doesn't apply to everything in AASB S2. Proportionality mechanisms only apply to certain aspects in AASB S2. And I'll discuss that on the next slide. Proportionality mechanisms do not introduce additional disclosure requirements, and also they do not exempt companies from providing disclosures. Proportionality mechanisms support entities in providing disclosures for specific requirements where there might be a high level of judgment or uncertainty. So it's only for specific aspects of AASB S2. And you can apply the specific requirements in a way that is proportionate to the entity's circumstances. So when you think at preparing your first mandatory report, consider transitional relief, but also consider proportionality mechanisms. So proportionality mechanisms, there's two in AASB S2. Proportionality mechanism number one is that you use all reasonable and supportable information that is available to the entity at the reporting date without undue cost or effort. So, for example, we use publicly available scenario analysis published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. As an example, it's publicly available. It's available to everybody without undue cost or effort. If you look at proportionality mechanism number two, is you apply AASB S2 or certain requirements in AASB S2 that are commensurate with the skills, the capabilities, and the resources that is available to an entity. So those entities that have the skills, the capabilities, the resources, they have to comply with absolutely everything. Others might get some assistance because they don't have all the skills, capabilities, and resources. So trying to make it easier for businesses to apply AASB S2. Now, this is an overview of when the two proportionality mechanisms would be available. So if you look at undue cost or effort, you can apply that to identification of climate-related risk and opportunities. You can apply it to the scope of the value chain. You can apply it to anticipated financial effects. You can apply it to the approach to climate-related scenario analysis, the measurement of Scope 3 emissions, and metrics in cross-industry metric categories. So there's 6 areas where you can say, I'm going to look for reasonable and supportable information that's available without undue cost or effort. And then there's 2 areas where you can look at a proportionality mechanism and that is commensurate with the skills, capabilities, and resources that are available to the entity. And the one is around anticipated financial effects, and the other one is around the approach to climate-related scenario analysis. I also want to flag the following 3 paragraphs in AASB S2. There's often a discussion around qualitative versus quantitative disclosures. And qualitative versus quantitative disclosures come into play in 2 areas. The one is looking at current and anticipated financial effects, and the other is when we talk about scenario analysis. Now, both of those aspects would say that an entity shall disclose qualitative and quantitative disclosures. However, when you look at paragraphs 19, 20, and 21, it does give some relief if you qualify, but be very careful with this. So in paragraph 19, an entity need not provide quantitative information about current or anticipated financial effects of a climate-related risk or opportunity if the entity determines that those effects are not separately identifiable, or the level of measurement uncertainty involved in estimating those effects is so high that the resulting quantitative information would not be useful. So, measurement uncertainty is something that is expected to only apply in very extremely rare circumstances. In the paragraph 19a, if we cannot look at these effects separately, it can't be identified separately. Again, we have to justify it, but these are considerations. In paragraph 20, they also say, in addition, an entity need not provide quantitative information about anticipated financial effects of climate-related risk or opportunity if the entity does not have the skills, capability, or resources to provide that quantitative information. So again, please be careful. If you're a Group 1 entity, you either have the skills or you've got the money due to your size to buy capability and resources to do the work. So paragraph 20 would be really hard to apply to a Group 1 entity. And then paragraph 21 just says, if an entity determines that in accordance with paragraph 19 and 20, they do not have to provide quantitative information about current or anticipated financial effects, they have to disclose a number of things. So why it's not provided the information, etc. So I just wanted to flag this with you. Please be careful. The business still have to apply disclose qualitative information. So it's not that they disclose nothing about current and anticipated financial effects. So qualitative information, and potentially, if they qualify, they don't need to disclose quantitative information. Often clients can provide some quantitative information, maybe quite simplistic quantification, but that's better than no quantification. And the expectation is that the ability to provide quantitative information would increase over time as more businesses mature around mandatory sustainability reporting. I also want to flag a number of disclosures around Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. So in the GHG protocol, there are certain disclosure requirements specifically for Scope 1, 2, and 3. So first of all, for Scope 1 and 2 emissions, a company is required to provide emissions disaggregated between those attributable to the consolidated accounting group and other investees, for example, JVs and associates. So the reason for this is they want comparability and connectedness between AASB 2 and the accompanying financial statements. And we know that sometimes our carbon accounting inventory is slightly different to the boundary that we use under normal financial reporting. An example of that is if an entity uses the operational control approach, which is very common in Australia because NGER requires operational control approach. So a bit of a disaggregation of the Scope 1 and 2 emissions if your operational control approach give you a different boundary than the reporting boundary under the accounting standards or AASB 2. Then for Scope 2 emissions, a company is required to provide location-based Scope 2 emissions, and then the entity is required to provide information about any contractual instruments necessary to understand the company's Scope 2 emissions. Market-based Scope 2 emissions is not required. You can voluntarily provide it, but it's technically not required by AASB 2. And then for Scope 3 emissions, a company is required to provide total Scope 3 emissions. So the company is not required to break it down into the 15 categories. So really important, you only provide the total, and then you also provide a list of emission categories that are actually included within that total Scope 3 emissions. And then there's additional information required for financed emissions. If the entity is in the asset management industry, commercial banking industry, or the insurance industry. To give you a bit of an example, there's often a bit of confusion about operational control approach and financial control approach and how that leads to different disclosures under AASB 2. So in this example, the reporting entity consists of a parent and its wholly owned and financially controlled subsidiary. So you've got a parent and a subsidiary in accordance with IFRS 10. The parent concludes it has operational control over the associate. So if you look at the operational control approach, if the entity decides to apply the operational control approach, the organizational boundary will have the parent, the subsidiary, as well as the associate. However, if you apply the financial control approach to exactly the same structure, your organizational boundary will only be the parent and the subsidiary, because the parent only has financial control over the subsidiary. The parent and the subsidiary only have significant influence over the associate, and therefore the associate is not part of financial control for carbon accounting purposes. So you can see here how operational control and financial control leads to a difference. Important. If we follow this through to the disclosures that we've just discussed, under operational control approach, the reporting entity would disclose Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions of the parent, the subsidiary, and the associate, because it has operational control over all three those entities. However, they have to disaggregate the Scope 1 and 2 emissions between the consolidated accounting group, so that's the parent and the subsidiary, and the other investees, that's the associate. So they only have to disaggregate Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions across the reporting group and other entities where they also have operational control. If you look at financial control for the same entity, if they've applied financial control, in this situation, there will be disclosures around Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 of the parent and the subsidiary, because both are within the organizational boundary. They will also disclose emissions of the associate, but in this case, as part of Scope 3, Category 15. And they don't have to disaggregate their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, because all of the Scope 1 and 2 emissions relate to the consolidated accounting group. So you can see whether you use operational control or financial control approach would have an impact on your disclosures under AASB 2. So this is a bit of a link between the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is for measurement, and AASB 2, which is looking at disclosures. The other thing that I thought I'll touch on is scenario analysis. And the reason I'm doing this, I feel as if there's great confusion around scenario analysis in practice. We've talked about it a number of times in the past, but I just want to recap so we've got clarity before we prepare our first mandatory sustainability report. First of all, we've got two different types of scenario analysis. And there's a link to an article that we've written in September this year. The one is you can use scenario analysis to assess your climate resilience. And that is required by AASB 2 paragraph 22. We are mandated to use scenario analysis to assess climate resilience, and there's a lot of disclosure requirements around the entity's climate resilience, paragraph 22. The other type of scenario analysis on the right-hand side is when we use scenario analysis to identify and assess climate risks. So this could be when we look at stress testing or we look at sensitivity analysis. So scenario analysis to assess an entity's climate resilience is different to scenario analysis to help us identify and assess risks. It is different to stress testing. It's different to a sensitivity analysis. And we explain it in this article. So some entities could use scenarios to help to identify risks at the start of the process. And then later on, they have to use a different type of scenario analysis to assess the business's climate resilience. So please be aware of that. Make sure you use the right type of scenario analysis for the circumstance. What's important is scenario analysis in relation to climate resilience is specifically required by the Corporations Act. Now, in Australia, our Corporation Act is actually going further than AASBS 2. And it says in section 296D that we have to conduct scenario analysis in order to assess the resilience of the business under a high global warming scenario and a low global warming scenario. So we've got two mandated scenarios to assess climate resilience, and then we've got disclosure requirements around those two scenarios, and they are outlined in paragraph 22. So if you look at paragraph 22, you have to do an assessment of climate resilience as at the reporting date. And the basis of that assessment, so how you've conducted the scenario analysis and when you've conducted the scenario analysis, have to be disclosed. Now, a company is not required to disclose their scenario analysis. However, a company is required to disclose its resilience assessment, and AASBS 2 mandates an entity to use scenario analysis to do that resilience assessment. So really important to consider that. Now, we know that scenario analysis could be a very expensive exercise, and therefore we look at publicly available scenarios that's available to us, and we try and use that for our business. Now, as a recap, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has a number of scenarios that we could use. So there are the SSP scenarios, and there are also the RCP scenarios. Now, the RCP scenarios are the older scenarios aligned with Assessment Report 5, where the SSP scenarios are aligned with Assessment Report 6. There's a high global warming scenario, and we've got a low global warming scenario. So you could look at these and pick the most appropriate ones. If you look at these IPCC scenarios, the graph on the left-hand side is really very useful from Assessment Report 6, which illustrates how our currently implemented policies, it looks like global warming will be heading to, let's say, around 2.8 to 3.2 degrees. Latest research says around 2.8 degrees. Therefore, if we want to limit global warming to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, we need a lot of additional policies to be implemented. In the IPCC scenarios, they look at the world at 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, and 4 degrees. So these are available, and you can use it for scenario analysis. Another one that's often used is the Network for Greening the Financial System, NGFS. And here they are looking at how do physical risk and transition risks interact. So if you look at high transition risk and high physical risk, that's where we have a fragmented world, too little, too late. If we look at low physical risk but high transition risk, that is a delayed transition. If you look at high physical risk but a low transition risk, that would be a hothouse world. That's our current policies. And then if you look at low transition risk and low physical risk, and that's what we would love to see, that is an orderly transition. So we'll be net zero by 2050. definitely below 2 degrees, and then also low demand. So you can use these scenarios to inform your scenario analysis. If you look at the NGFS scenarios, for current policies, the warming is 2.9 degrees, and they give you an overview of the policy reaction, the technology change, the carbon dioxide removal, the regional policy variation, and the risks. And then they also have an explanation of their net zero 2050 scenario, which is warming of around 1.4 degrees, and policy reaction is immediate and smooth, technology change is fast, carbon dioxide removal, we've got medium to high use, regional policy variation, there's medium variation, and significant transition risk in that scenario. So again, you can use the NGFS scenarios. The third set of publicly available scenarios that you could use is the International Energy Agencies. And this is scenarios developed using global energy and climate models. Again, they've got high global warming scenario. So that's where we look at the stated policies scenario, warming around 2.4 degrees. And then also they have a low global warming scenario. So that is our net zero emissions by 2050 scenario, warming of around 1.5 degrees. And it provides sector by sector pathways to achieve targets. So I think what is really important, and this is what we've articulated in this article, is which publicly available scenarios are appropriate for the Corporations Act requirements. So there's a lot of publicly available scenarios out there, but not all of them would be appropriate for the Corporations Act requirements. So if you look at IPCC, for high warming, the best one would be SSP 2 to 4.5, and low warming SSP 1 to 1.9. For NGFS, there for high warming, you look at current policies, and for low warming, you look at net zero 2050. And for International Energy Agency, you look at the STEPS scenario for high warming and the net zero emissions by 2050 for the low warming scenario. So very important. We've got these 3 external sources, but not all the scenarios within each external source is appropriate for Corps Act requirements. So this is a good article to try to link it for you within Australia. In particular then, if we look at IPCC scenarios, we've said for the low warming scenario, it is good to look at SSP 1 to 1.9, and that is under the 6th assessment report. However, they don't have a lot of data for physical risk under SSP 1 to 1.9. And therefore, again, if we don't have enough data available, we'll use SSP 1 to 1.9 for transitional risks, and we'll use SSP 1 to 2.6 or RCP 2.6 for physical risk for that low warming scenario. So we actually use a combination of SSP 1 to 1.9 and SSP 1 to 2.6 for the low warming scenario. And again, in the article, we explain why that would be appropriate. SSP 1 to 2.6 and RCP 2.6 have data around physical risks. It will be more conservative than SSP 1 to 1.9 and therefore appropriate to use. If you look at your external scenarios, if we do a bit of a summary of the different scenarios, if you look at all 3 publicly available scenarios, a high warming scenario would be a warming between 2.4 degrees and 3 degrees. There will be slow climate action and technology change around the world. There will be low use of carbon dioxide removal technology. There will be a degrading environment, and inequality would persist. If you look at a low warming scenario across those 3 scenarios, warming would be limited to 1.5 degrees. There will be strong climate action and technology change around the world. There will be accelerated use of carbon dioxide removal technology. They'll be preserving the nature, and there will be reduced inequality. So at a very high level, commonalities across those two scenarios required by the Corporations Act and commonalities across these three publicly available scenarios. So if you look at scenario development, this is a challenging area. We've got a bit of a process that we use when we do this work for clients. The gray blocks are the bits that the clients would do, and the green blocks would be what we would do. So, you know, we would assess the external environment. We would formulate the focal question. We will define the time horizons across short, medium, and long term. We will try and identify the driving forces and rate and rank the driving forces. We will then draft the narrative and the description of the low warming world and the high warming world. And step 5, we do the quantification, we look at the quality, and we finalize the scenarios. So that will give you a bit of an overview of what we do for scenario analysis. If you want to know how to conduct scenario analysis in order to assess climate resilience, this is discussed in the TCFD report as well as the TCFD technical supplement. There's also TCFD guidance on scenario analysis, and obviously how does that link to the requirements of AASBS 2, specifically paragraph 22, and it's further explained in the appendix, the implementation guidance. If we then move on to current and anticipated effects, and this is the bottom part of this diagram. We've looked at risks and opportunities. We've looked at the impact on strategy and risk management. Now we consider the financial impact on profit and loss, on cash flow, on the statement of financial position. People often ask, when we look at these financial effects and we have to do financial modeling, do we only model the low warming and high warming scenario? You can do as many scenarios as you want, but the 2 in the Corps Act are the 1.5 degrees and the 2.5 degrees. You can do more. But the other thing to not forget, and I've put a red block around it, is you also have to do modeling around business as usual disclosures, considering your current strategy, your current investment and disposal plans, your current sources of financing. You know, what financial effects have you experienced in your current reporting period, and also what are the financial effects that's anticipated over the short, medium, and long term. Having a look at cross-referencing and labeling. This is a question that we often get asked. How do we cross-reference? How do we label the mandatory sustainability report? Now, I think the ASIC regulatory guide to 80 is very useful in this regard. If you look at cross-referencing, paragraphs 86 onwards, they discuss cross-referencing. AASBS 2 permits a reporting entity's sustainability report to cross-reference to information in another report prepared by the reporting entity. If it complies with paragraph 63 of Appendix D of AASBS 1, and Appendix D contains some requirements brought forward from AASBS 1. And then also in section 87 here, it says if a reporting entity's sustainability report cross-references to information in another report prepared by the entity, it is strongly encouraged to lodge the other report with its sustainability report if it's not already been lodged with ASIC. So to lodge it together. And why is that? Because information included by cross-reference is taken to form part of the complete set of climate-related disclosures. Information included by cross-reference must be available on the same terms and at the same time as the climate-related disclosures, and the users of the financial report, both present and future should have access to both the sustainability report and that cross-referenced report. So if you're cross-referencing to another report, that report will also have to be lodged with ASIC at the same time. The other area to look at is, labeling. Sometimes there's a lot of entities that have historically also prepared a sustainability report or voluntary sustainability report. And that sustainability report could contain information relating to sustainability, relating to climate-related financial information. For example, BDO Australia, since 2022, we've prepared a voluntary sustainability report every year, and included in that voluntary sustainability report, we had information around our greenhouse gas emissions, as well as our actions around the environment. Entities may wish to disclose voluntary and other mandatory related sustainability information to meet information needs of users. So you could say, I want a voluntary sustainability report and I want a mandatory sustainability report. So you can publish the voluntary and mandatory report separately, or you can have both of them together in your annual report. So there are options available. Now, reporting entities should ensure that climate-related financial information is clearly identifiable and not obscured by additional information. And then also, you can prepare a standalone report that only contains your climate information, and then a separate standalone report that is your voluntary sustainability report. Now, personally, that's my preference. However, you can also keep it together. If you keep it together, make sure you label the separate parts clearly, so users can see which part is subject to assurance and which part is not subject to assurance, which part is complying with AASB S2, which part is other information. And also it helps to identify the director's responsibilities. So just additional information on the regulatory guide. When we talk about getting ready and pulling all of this together, I think it's important to consider the need for various projects. Now, at BDO, we've developed a best practice roadmap for mandatory sustainability reporting. We've got Project Stream 1, which has 5 steps, and it's focused on measuring your carbon footprint over the first 2 years. And then the second project stream is focusing on all the other aspects within AASB S2. And then the third stream is where we look at a strategic focus that could result in a voluntary report. Now, our focus at the moment is the top 2 project streams, because that's where we're looking at mandatory sustainability reporting in compliance with AASB S2. Now, how are we really doing this in practice? You would have seen on the previous slide, and I'll just go back for a second, we've got 10 projects across 2 project streams, 5 projects in each stream. In practice, we run those 2 project streams for our clients concurrently. The first project stream, we do boundary setting around our carbon footprint, then the basis of prep, then we measure scope 1 and 2, and all of that happen in the first year. And then steps 4 and 5 is the next year. You measure scope 3 and you do target setting. However, at exactly the same time, we also do the second project stream. We look at governance and risk management. We look at conducting our risk and opportunity assessment. We look at conducting a scenario analysis. We look at doing financial modeling of the impact on financial statements. And finally, we prepare the sustainability report. So in practice, we've got 2 project streams running concurrently in order to get to our mandatory sustainability report. I would like to end today's webinar by showing you an example of an IFRS S2 report. Now, as I've said earlier, in Australia, We are the first significant economy mandatorily adopting IFRS S2 or AASB S2, which is highly aligned to IFRS S2. So at the moment, there are no examples in Australia in compliance with AASB S2. If we look at New Zealand, the entities reporting there are reporting somewhat aligned to IFRS S2, but not exactly. The only other country that is mandatorily reported under a standard very closely aligned to IFRS S2 is Turkey. And that's not as a bigger economy as Australia. However, in August, when I attended training by Sue Lloyd, the deputy chair of the International Sustainability Standards Board, she has flagged that there's a Brazilian entity, a mining entity, that has voluntarily prepared a mandatory voluntarily prepared a climate report in accordance with IFRS S2. And she said that is a fairly good example. So I've thought I'll flag that, and I've put in the link for you to have a look at. I mean, if the ISSB refers to it, it can't be, terrible. It might not be perfect, but it's a good example. And there are not many examples. So it's Vale. So first of all, it's the first mining company in the world and the first Brazilian company to voluntarily adopt IFRS S2. And that will, IFRS S2 will only become mandatory in Brazil starting in 2027. So they're very early. They've applied it for 31 December 2024. And they want to focus on enhancing transparency and to continue to identify and assess climate-related risks. So I think that's a great initiative. So this is, again, a link to the report, and that's the front page of the report. If you look at the contents page, I've just put a few extracts in here for you. They've got a basis of preparation and presentation. They've got the organizational reporting boundary. They've got significant judgments and estimates. Disclosures around the business model and value chain, disclosures around corporate governance, disclosure around the management of risks and opportunities. And number 7 is around climate transition strategy. Number 8 is around risk and opportunities related to climate change. They've got a section specifically on resilience and a section on metrics and targets. And you can see they also got assurance over this report. This report, which has been flagged by Sue from the ISSB, is a 50-page report. So this is extensive. IFRS S2, AASB S2 reports will not be short reports. So this is a bit of an extract. You can see what the basis of preparation and presentation looks like. You can see there's a section on connectivity with financial statements, which is very important. A section on first-time adoption of international sustainability-related disclosure standards. Then they've got a section on the organizational boundary, and they've got a section on significant judgments and uncertainties, and also a table that is linking to additional information around internal carbon pricing in strategic planning, carbon pricing, number 9, climate scenarios. The method for calculating GHG emissions is a significant judgment. GHG-related metrics, and also significant judgments around quantification of anticipated financial effects. So a lot of disclosures. They also start off by having a diagram across the entity's business model and value chain, which is really interesting. They also have explanation across an assessment of climate-related risks and opportunities, and particularly how did they define short-term, how did they define the medium-term, and how did they define the long-term. You can see they've also flagged their climate risks at TR1, 2, 3, at transition risk number 1, 2, and 3. And physical risk number 1, so 4 particular risks, and they've identified 2 opportunities. Around the governance, very interesting, they've disclosed their corporate governance with a diagram, which I think is a good idea. And then they explain further sustainability-related governance and how it fits into overall governance, the role of the board of directors, the role of the sustainability committee, the role of the audit and risk committee. They then also go on and talk about management's role in sustainability related governance. So they talk about the executive committee, this sustainability risks executive committee, and they have a low carbon forum. And very interestingly, as is required by AASB 2, they also disclose information around executive remuneration and how short-term remuneration and long-term remuneration are linked to climate-related risks and opportunities. When they disclose their climate-related risk and opportunities, they disclose their climate-related risk methodology, which is around identification, analysis and treatment, monitoring, as well as communication and reporting. So they disclose the methodology and then they disclose and describe the risks and opportunities. So for example, if you look at transition risk number 1, they have exposure to regulations related to GHG emissions, resulting in a possible reduction in market share and higher operating costs. And then they disclose the nature of the risk, the mitigation efforts that they already have in place or the controls. They go on to disclose the efforts to adapt the business model around the risks that they've identified. They talk about current financial effects of that particular risk and anticipated financial effects. So a lot of amazing disclosures. I like the way they've pulled it all together. So this is transition risk number 3. Again, it's failure to meet the 2030 carbon target for scopes 1 and 2 emissions reduction, and also increased scrutiny of voluntary commitments and GHG reductions, including but not limited to scope 3 emissions reductions. Again, they disclose the nature of the risk, the mitigation or resilience efforts, current and anticipated financial effects. They also go on to disclose significant judgments and uncertainties, a whole section, disclosing internal carbon pricing in strategic planning, the carbon dioxide equivalent premium trend in strategic planning. Number 3, technology factor included in investigation efforts and business model adaptation. If you go on and look at what they do around climate-related targets, they disclose their basis for target setting, similar to how they've disclosed their methodology for risk identification and assessment. And then on the right-hand side, they've got a target there, a 33% reduction in absolute scope 1 and 2 market-based GHG emissions. And for that particular target, they've disclosed the metric, the objective, the coverage, the greenhouse gases covered, the scope, the period, the base years, the milestones or interim targets, the methodology for setting the target, the type of target, is it an absolute or an intensity target, the target review frequency, metric used to monitor progress and progress achieved. So for every target, they've got that table with all the information required by IFRS S2. They've got some very good ideas on how they've put it together so it's easy to absorb. They also have information around carbon credits that they want to use to offset scope 3 GHG emissions. So agreements and partnerships that they've got in place to develop carbon credits, but they also have a diagram to illustrate how carbon credits fit into their strategy. So very interesting diagram. They also have information around their greenhouse gas emissions. So this is an extract on scope 1, the assumptions, the categories, the data sources, the calculation method. So again, I like the way they've used tables to make it easier to digest the information that they've disclosed. I've provided a link, but that's a really good report to have a look at whilst we wait for Australian entities to do their first reporting. So how can BDO help you? At BDO, we've got sustainability reporting specialist. You can contact me. You can contact Kevin Frobus, who's based in Sydney, Tom Hogben, who's based in Brisbane, Ashley Woodley, who's based in Perth. But you're always welcome to reach out to me, and very happy to speak to you and assist you. You can also subscribe to our monthly sustainability news or our monthly corporate reporting insights. As soon as there's latest developments, we make sure you have an article and you're aware of all the latest developments. Finally, I would like to thank you for joining me for today's webinar